The morning sun painted the palace gates in golden hues as thousands of tourists gathered for the daily changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood a small boy named Oliver, barely 8 years old, sitting in a wheelchair with his mother Sarah behind him. His eyes sparkled with wonder as he watched the tall guards in their crimson uniforms and bearskin hats march with perfect precision. Oliver had always been fascinated by soldiers, collecting toy figures and reading books about brave warriors, but his own legs had never worked properly since birth. Sarah noticed her son leaning forward in his wheelchair, trying to get a better view. She gently pushed him closer to the front, weaving through the dense crowd of tourists snapping photos and chattering in different languages. Oliver's small hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair tightly, his heart racing with excitement. He had begged his mother for months to bring him here, to see the royal guards up close, and finally, she had saved enough money for the trip to London. Among the guards stood Captain James Mitchell, a veteran who had served for 15 years. His face remained stoic and professional as always, eyes fixed straight ahead, but something caught his attention from the corner of his eye. A small boy in a wheelchair pressed against the barrier, looking up at him with such pure admiration that it stirred something deep in his heart. James had seen thousands of faces during his duty, but this child's expression was different. It held hope, dreams, and an innocence that reminded him why he had joined the service in the first place. The ceremony continued with its usual grandeur. The guards marched in synchronized steps, their boots clicking against the cobblestones in perfect rhythm. Drums rolled, commands were shouted, and the crowd watched in awe. But James found his thoughts drifting to the boy. During a brief moment when the formation turned, he managed to glance at Oliver again. The child was attempting to salute, his small hand trembling as he held it to his forehead, mimicking the soldiers he so admired. When the ceremony concluded, the guards were supposed to maintain their positions for photographs before returning to their posts. James stood at attention, but his mind was already forming a plan. He had a 15-minute break before his next duty shift, and he knew he had to do something. As the crowd began to disperse, he noticed the boy and his mother starting to move away, the wheelchair rolling slowly through the thinning masses. James broke from his position, which was highly unusual, and walked toward them with quick, purposeful strides. His fellow guards exchanged surprised glances, but James didn't care about protocol at that moment. He approached Oliver and his mother, his tall figure casting a shadow over the wheelchair. Sarah looked up, startled and slightly nervous. Meeting a royal guard out of formation was not something tourists expected. "Excuse me, ma'am," James said in a gentle voice that contrasted with his imposing appearance. "I couldn't help but notice your son during the ceremony. He has quite the salute." Oliver's eyes went wide with disbelief. A real royal guard was talking to him. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He was too amazed to speak. Sarah smiled, though tears were forming in her eyes. "He's been practicing that salute for weeks. This has been his dream, to see you all in person. He loves everything about soldiers and guards. I'm sorry if we were in the way or caused any—" James raised his hand gently. "Not at all, ma'am. It would be my honor to spend a few minutes with your son, if that's all right with you. I'm on a short break." Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. She nodded quickly, wiping at her eyes. Oliver found his voice at last. "Really? You want to talk to me?" the boy asked, his voice small and filled with wonder. "Absolutely, soldier," James replied, crouching down to be at eye level with Oliver. The guard's knees protested slightly. He wasn't as young as he used to be, but the joy on the child's face made any discomfort worthwhile. "What's your name?" "Oliver, sir." "Oliver Thompson, sir," the boy responded, attempting another salute. His hand was steadier this time, filled with newfound confidence. James returned the salute with perfect military precision. "It's an honor to meet you, Oliver. I'm Captain James Mitchell. Tell me, what do you know about the Royal Guards?" For the next several minutes, Oliver talked excitedly about everything he had learned from books and videos. He spoke about the history of the Guards, the different regiments, the significance of the bearskin hats, and even knew some of the marching commands. James listened intently, occasionally nodding or adding a detail that made Oliver's eyes light up even brighter. As they talked, Sarah watched with a mixture of joy and sadness. Her son had spent his entire life in that wheelchair, facing challenges that no child should have to endure. He had undergone countless medical appointments, therapies, and procedures, none of which had given them much hope. The doctor said his condition was permanent, that his legs would never gain the strength needed to walk. She had learned to accept it, but Oliver never stopped dreaming. He would often tell her that one day he would walk, that one day he would be strong like the soldiers he admired. James noticed the sadness in Sarah's eyes even as she smiled. He was a father himself, and he understood the weight parents carried when their children faced difficulties. An idea began forming in his mind, something that went far beyond this brief conversation. He stood up and placed a hand on Oliver's shoulder. "You know, Oliver, being strong isn't just about the body. It's about the heart and the mind, too. I can tell you have both." Oliver nodded seriously, absorbing every word. "I'd like to ask you something. Would you like to be an honorary member of the Guard?" Oliver's jaw dropped. "What, me? But I can't even—" James interrupted him gently. "Can't is not a word we use in the Guard. We face challenges and we overcome them. Every single one of us has had to push beyond what we thought was possible. I see that same determination in you." Sarah stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Captain Mitchell, that's incredibly kind, but I don't want Oliver to have false hopes about—" James looked at her with understanding eyes. "Ma'am, I'm not offering false hope. I'm offering purpose and support. If you'll allow me, I'd like to stay in touch with your family. I have connections with some excellent physical therapists and medical professionals through the military. No promises, but perhaps we can explore some options you haven't considered yet." The words hung in the air like a miracle. Sarah had stopped hoping for miracles years ago, but standing before this kind-hearted guard, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Genuine hope. Oliver was bouncing in his wheelchair with excitement, his young mind not fully grasping the magnitude of what was being offered, but knowing instinctively that something wonderful was happening. James pulled out a card from his uniform pocket and handed it to Sarah. "My personal information is on there. Please reach out to me, I mean it. I want to help however I can." He then turned to Oliver and saluted him one more time. "Remember, soldier, you've got the heart of a warrior. Don't ever forget that." As James had to return to his post, he walked away with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He had spent so long following orders and maintaining protocols that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to truly make a difference in someone's life. Oliver watched the captain disappear into the palace grounds, his small hand still raised in a salute, tears of joy streaming down his cheeks. 3 days after their encounter at the palace, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the card Captain Mitchell had given her. She had picked it up and put it down at least 20 times, torn between hope and fear. What if this was just a polite gesture? What if she contacted him and seemed desperate? What if she got Oliver's hopes up only to have them crushed again? She had been down that road before, chasing treatments that promised improvement but delivered disappointment. Oliver wheeled into the kitchen, his face still glowing with happiness from their palace visit. He had barely stopped talking about Captain Mitchell since they returned home. He had even started a new game where he pretended to be a royal guard, sitting up straighter in his wheelchair and practicing his salute in the mirror. Every night before bed, he would tell his mother about his dream of standing beside the guards one day, wearing the same uniform, protecting the palace with strength and pride. "Mum, are you going to call him?" Oliver asked, nodding toward the card in her hand. His young voice carried a weight of hope that made Sarah's heart ache. She looked at her son, at his bright eyes and determined expression, and made a decision. Even if nothing came of it, even if it led nowhere, she had to try. She owed him that much. She owed herself that much, too. That afternoon, Sarah dialed the number with shaking fingers. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Captain Mitchell speaking." For a moment, Sarah couldn't find her words. She cleared her throat and spoke softly. "Hello, Captain. This is Sarah Thompson. We met at the palace gates a few days ago with my son Oliver." "Sarah, I'm so glad you called." James responded warmly, and she could hear the genuine smile in his voice. "I've been hoping to hear from you. How is young Oliver doing?" They talked for nearly an hour. James explained that he had already reached out to some colleagues who specialized in pediatric physical therapy and rehabilitation. He had a friend, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, who ran a private clinic that worked with children facing mobility challenges. She had agreed to evaluate Oliver at no charge, just as a favor to James. Sarah felt tears rolling down her cheeks as she listened. Strangers didn't do things like this. People didn't go out of their way for a child they had just met. But here was this man, this captain of the Royal Guard, organizing help for her son as if Oliver were his own family. When she tried to thank him, her voice broke with emotion. James simply said, "Oliver saluted me like a true soldier. Soldiers take care of their own." The following week, Sarah and Oliver arrived at Dr. Chen's clinic in central London. The building was modern and bright, with large windows that let in streams of sunlight. Oliver looked around with curiosity as his mother pushed him through the automatic doors. The waiting room had colorful artwork on the walls and toys in the corner, but Oliver was too nervous to play with anything. He kept fidgeting with the hem of his shirt, wondering what the doctor would say. Dr. Chen was a petite woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a warm smile. She greeted them both and led them to an examination room that was equipped with various machines and exercise equipment. "So you're the young man Captain Mitchell told me about," she said, kneeling beside Oliver's wheelchair. "He spoke very highly of you. Said you have the heart of a warrior." Oliver blushed but sat up straighter. "Yes, ma'am. I want to be strong like him one day." Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. "Well, let's see what we're working with, shall we?" She spent over 2 hours examining Oliver, testing his reflexes, muscle strength, and bone structure. She asked questions about his medical history, previous treatments, and current condition. Sarah answered everything honestly, though her voice trembled when discussing the times doctors had told them there was no hope. After the examination, Dr. Chen sat down with Sarah in her office while Oliver waited outside with a nurse, who showed him picture books about human anatomy. The doctor's expression was serious but not grim. She folded her hands on her desk and spoke carefully. "Mrs. Thompson, I won't lie to you. Oliver's condition is severe. His muscles are significantly underdeveloped and his bone density is lower than it should be. However, I don't believe his case is hopeless." Sarah leaned forward, hardly daring to breathe. "What do you mean?" Dr. Chen pulled out some scans and pointed to specific areas. "Previous doctors may have given up too quickly. Yes, Oliver will never have what we consider normal muscle function without intensive intervention, but there are new therapy techniques we could try. Hydrotherapy, specialized electrical stimulation, targeted strength training. It would be a long process, possibly years, but I believe we could help him develop enough strength to stand, possibly even take steps with assistance." The words hit Sarah like a wave. Stand. Walk with assistance. These were things she had stopped letting herself imagine. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed, years of suppressed hope finally breaking through. Dr. Chen came around the desk and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It won't be easy. It will require dedication from all of us, especially Oliver. But if that boy has even half the determination Captain Mitchell described, I think we have a real chance." When Sarah composed herself, she asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "Doctor, I have to be honest. I can't afford this kind of treatment. We live on a limited income and our insurance doesn't cover experimental therapies." Dr. Chen smiled gently. "Captain Mitchell has already arranged for a fund through the Military Veterans Association. They've agreed to cover the costs of Oliver's treatment. You won't pay a single penny." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had never met anyone like James Mitchell, someone who would go to such lengths for a child he barely knew. When she left the office and told Oliver the news, the boy let out a shout of pure joy that echoed through the clinic. He threw his arms around his mother's waist and held her tight. "I'm going to walk, Mum. I'm really going to walk." The therapy began the following month. 3 times a week, Sarah would bring Oliver to the clinic after school. The sessions were intense and often painful. Oliver would work in a therapy pool, his small body supported by the water as therapists helped him move his legs in walking motions. He would lie on tables while electrodes stimulated his muscles, sometimes causing them to twitch and contract in ways that made him wince. He would practice standing between parallel bars, his legs shaking with effort as therapists held him upright. There were days when Oliver cried from exhaustion and frustration. There were sessions where he made no progress at all, where his legs refused to cooperate no matter how hard he tried. Sarah would watch from the observation window, her heart breaking every time her son struggled, but also swelling with pride at his refusal to give up. Oliver never once asked to stop. Even on his worst days, he would think about Captain Mitchell and the Royal Guards, drawing strength from their example. James visited the clinic whenever his duty schedule allowed. He would arrive still in uniform, his presence filling the room with authority and kindness. He would talk to Oliver about discipline, perseverance, and the true meaning of strength. He told stories about his own training, the times he wanted to quit but pushed through. He explained that every soldier faces moments of doubt, but it's the ones who keep going that become truly great. One afternoon, about 4 months into therapy, something remarkable happened. Oliver was standing between the parallel bars as usual, his therapist supporting him on each side. Dr. Chen was encouraging him to put weight on his right leg, then his left. Oliver's face was scrunched up in concentration, sweat beading on his forehead. Then, without warning, he lifted his right foot slightly off the ground and moved it forward about 6 inches. The room fell silent. Oliver's eyes went wide. The therapists looked at each other in amazement. Dr. Chen's hand flew to her mouth. It wasn't much, just a tiny movement, but it was the first time Oliver had ever moved his leg forward under his own power. Sarah, watching from the window, burst into tears and ran into the therapy room. She knelt beside her son, holding his hand tightly. "Did you see that, Mom?" Oliver asked, his voice filled with wonder. "I moved it. I really moved it." Everyone in the room was crying now, even the usually stoic therapists. Dr. Chen hugged Oliver carefully, mindful not to disrupt his balance. "You did it, Oliver. You took your first step." That evening, Sarah called James to tell him the news. When he heard what had happened, his voice cracked with emotion. "I knew he could do it. That boy is unstoppable." He paused, then added, "Tell him that all the guards at the palace are proud of him. Tell him he's already proven himself to be a true soldier." Over the next several months, Oliver's progress accelerated. The single step became 2 steps, then 3. He learned to shift his weight more effectively, to engage muscles he had never used before. The therapy remained grueling, but every small victory fueled his determination. He kept a chart on his bedroom wall, marking each milestone. First unassisted stand, first 3 steps, first walk across the room with a walker. James continued to visit regularly, becoming not just a mentor but a friend to the entire family. He would bring other guards with him sometimes, and they would all cheer Oliver on during his therapy sessions. The boy had become something of a legend among the palace guards, a symbol of courage and determination. They had even made him an honorary junior guard, presenting him with a miniature uniform that he wore proudly during his visits to the palace. Winter arrived in London with cold winds and gray skies, but inside Dr. Chen's clinic, Oliver's determination burned brighter than ever. 8 months had passed since he took his first step, and now he could walk short distances with the help of leg braces and a walker. His legs were still weak and would probably always require some support, but the impossible had become possible. The boy who doctors said would never walk was proving them all wrong. Sarah had documented every moment of the journey with her phone camera. She had videos of Oliver's first step, his first walk across the therapy room, his first time standing without support for 10 full seconds. At night, she would watch these videos and cry happy tears, still unable to fully believe the transformation she was witnessing. Her son was blossoming not just physically but emotionally too. He smiled more, laughed louder, and carried himself with a confidence that came from knowing he could overcome anything. During one of James's visits to the clinic, he pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. They stood in the hallway while Oliver worked with his therapists inside. James's usually cheerful expression had turned thoughtful and slightly nervous. "I've been thinking about something," he began, choosing his words carefully. "The annual Palace Charity Gala is coming up in 3 months. It's a big event with members of the royal family, military personnel, and benefactors. I was wondering if Oliver might like to attend as my special guest." Sarah's eyes widened. "The Palace Gala? James, that's incredibly generous, but I wouldn't know the first thing about such a formal event. And Oliver, he's just a child. Would that even be appropriate?" James smiled warmly. "Oliver has worked harder than most adults I know. He deserves to be celebrated. And I was thinking, what if we made it even more special? What if Oliver walked into that gala on his own 2 feet? With his braces and walker, of course, but walking nonetheless. It could be his coming out moment, showing everyone what determination and courage can achieve." The idea both thrilled and terrified Sarah. 3 months wasn't much time, and Oliver's walking was still unstable. What if he fell in front of all those important people? What if it was too much pressure for him? But then she thought about how much her son had already accomplished against impossible odds. If anyone could do this, it was Oliver. She agreed to the plan but made James promise they wouldn't tell Oliver yet. She wanted to discuss it with Dr. Chen first. Dr. Chen was enthusiastic but realistic when Sarah brought up the idea. It's an ambitious goal, but not impossible. We would need to intensify Oliver's therapy, focus specifically on building his endurance and stability. The gala will be a long event, so he needs to be able to manage periods of standing and walking without exhausting himself completely. She created a new training program that would push Oliver harder than ever before. When they finally told Oliver about the gala invitation, his reaction was everything they hoped for. He shouted with joy, pumped his fists in the air, and immediately started asking what the palace looked like inside. "I'm going to walk in there, Mom." "Not in my wheelchair, but walking." "Captain Mitchell will be so proud." His enthusiasm was infectious, and it carried him through the grueling weeks of training that followed. The new therapy regimen was intense. Oliver practiced walking for longer distances, learning to navigate stairs with his walker, and building the stamina to stand during conversations. Dr. Chen brought in a physical therapist who specialized in formal events, teaching Oliver how to maintain good posture, how to shake hands while using his walker, and even how to bow politely without losing his balance. Every session brought new challenges, but Oliver faced them all with unwavering determination. James visited more frequently during this period, sometimes just sitting quietly in the observation room, watching Oliver work. He was amazed by the boy's spirit. In his 15 years as a Royal Guard, James had seen many displays of courage, discipline on parade grounds, soldiers maintaining composure under pressure, but nothing quite compared to watching an 8-year-old boy fight with everything he had to achieve, what most people took for granted. It reminded James why he had wanted to help in the first place. One afternoon, about 6 weeks before the gala, Oliver had a setback. He was practicing walking across the therapy room when his right leg suddenly gave out. He fell hard, his walker clattering away, and he hit the padded floor with a painful thud. Sarah rushed to his side, as did the therapists, but Oliver pushed them away. He was crying, not from physical pain, but from frustration and fear. "What if I can't do it?" he sobbed. "What if I fall at the gala in front of everyone?" Sarah held her son close, stroking his hair. She didn't have easy answers. The truth was he might fall. Walking would always be difficult for him, and there were no guarantees. But before she could speak, James entered the room. He had been watching from outside and knew this was a critical moment. He walked over and knelt beside Oliver, his uniform crisp and imposing, but his eyes gentle and understanding. "Oliver, look at me," James said firmly but kindly. Oliver raised his tear-stained face. "Do you know how many times I've fallen during my career? Hundreds, maybe thousands. During training, during ceremonies, even during important events. Every single guard has fallen at some point. It's not about never falling. It's about getting back up every single time." He helped Oliver to his feet, steadying him carefully. "You've already accomplished something remarkable. Whether you walk into that gala or wheel in your chair, you're still the bravest person I know." Those words gave Oliver the strength to continue. He got back to work, more determined than ever. The fall had scared him, but it also taught him an important lesson about resilience. Over the next several weeks, he fell several more times, but each time he got up faster, dusted himself off, and kept going. His legs grew stronger, his balance improved, and his confidence returned. Sarah worked extra shifts at her job to afford a nice suit for Oliver and a dress for herself. She wanted them both to look their best for this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. James helped coordinate everything, arranging transportation, explaining the gala's schedule, and even conducting practice sessions where he taught Oliver proper etiquette for meeting important guests. Oliver took it all very seriously, practicing his handshake and his polite greetings until they became second nature. The week before the gala, Dr. Chen conducted a final evaluation. She watched Oliver walk back and forth across the clinic, noting his posture, his endurance, and his control. When he finished, she smiled broadly. "You're ready," she announced. "You've worked harder than any patient I've ever had. I'm confident you can do this." Oliver beamed with pride, standing as tall as his braces would allow. The night before the gala, Oliver could barely sleep. He lay in bed, staring at his miniature guard uniform hanging on his closet door, imagining what the next evening would bring. He thought about all the people who had helped him get to this point. His mother, who never gave up on him, Dr. Chen, who believed in him, the therapist who pushed him, and most of all, Captain Mitchell, who had seen potential in a boy in a wheelchair and changed his entire life. Sarah didn't sleep much either. She sat in the living room, looking at the wheelchair that had been such a constant presence in their home for 8 years. It would always be there when Oliver needed it, but tomorrow he would walk. He would enter that palace on his own 2 feet, defying every doctor who said it couldn't be done. She thought about the moment at the palace gates when James had first approached them, how it had seemed like a simple, kind gesture. She had no idea then that it would become the catalyst for a miracle. Morning came with pale sunlight streaming through the windows. Oliver woke early, too excited to stay in bed. He practiced walking around his room, testing his legs, making sure everything still worked as it should. He ate a good breakfast because Dr. Chen had stressed the importance of keeping his energy up. He took a long bath and carefully put on his new suit, struggling a bit with the tie until his mother helped him. When he looked at himself in the mirror, he saw someone different from the boy he used to be. He saw someone strong. James arrived in the afternoon to pick them up in a car provided by the palace. He was in his full dress uniform, medals gleaming on his chest, and he looked every inch the distinguished officer. When he saw Oliver standing in the doorway in his suit, supported by his walker but standing nonetheless, his eyes grew moist. "You look like a true gentleman, Oliver. I'm honored to be your escort this evening." The drive to the palace felt surreal. Oliver pressed his face against the car window, watching the familiar streets of London pass by but seeing them differently now. Everything looked more vivid, more beautiful. When they arrived at the palace gates, security guards who knew James waved them through. They drove past the tourist areas Oliver had visited months ago and entered a private entrance used for official events. Inside, the palace was even more magnificent than Oliver had imagined. Crystal chandeliers hung from ornate ceilings. Marble floors gleamed under soft lighting, and paintings of kings and queens lined the walls. Staff members moved about with quiet efficiency, making final preparations for the gala. James led them through a side corridor to a waiting area where other guests were gathering. Oliver could hear the murmur of sophisticated conversation and the soft notes of a string quartet warming up. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the grandeur of it all. She was just a working-class mother from a modest neighborhood, and here she was in a palace about to attend a royal gala. But when she looked at her son, standing tall with his walker, his face glowing with excitement, she knew they belonged here just as much as anyone else. Oliver had earned this through blood, sweat, and tears. They both had. James introduced them to several of his fellow guards, all of whom greeted Oliver with respect and admiration. Word of the boy's journey had spread through the military community, and he had become something of an inspiration. The guards told Oliver stories about their own challenges, treating him not as a child but as an equal, someone who understood the meaning of dedication and perseverance. Oliver listened intently, absorbing every word, feeling more like a soldier than ever before. The grand ballroom doors opened at 7 o'clock sharp, and guests began to enter. Oliver stood at the threshold with James beside him, Sarah just behind them. This was the moment they had worked toward for 3 months. His legs trembled slightly, but not from weakness. It was excitement mixed with nerves. Through those doors lay a room filled with important people, nobility, military officers, and dignitaries from around the world. And he was about to walk among them. James placed a reassuring hand on Oliver's shoulder. "Remember what we practiced. Slow and steady. There's no rush. Everyone here tonight knows who you are and what you've accomplished. They're all rooting for you." Oliver nodded, gripping his walker tightly. He took a deep breath the way Dr. Chen had taught him, and took his first step into the ballroom. The room was breathtaking. Gold leaf decorated the high ceiling. Enormous paintings in gilded frames covered the walls, and hundreds of candles flickered in magnificent chandeliers. Round tables draped in white linen were arranged throughout the space, each with centerpieces of fresh flowers. A live orchestra played gentle classical music from a raised platform. Waiters in pristine uniforms moved through the crowd carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. It looked like something from a fairy tale. As Oliver walked slowly into the room, conversations began to quiet. People noticed the small boy with the walker, dressed in his sharp suit, moving with careful determination. Some recognized him from the stories that had circulated through military and charity circles. Others simply saw a child showing remarkable courage. Without planning or announcement, guests began to applaud. It started with a few people near the entrance, then spread through the room like a wave. Within seconds, everyone in the ballroom was clapping for Oliver. The sound was overwhelming. Oliver stopped walking, his eyes wide with surprise and emotion. He hadn't expected this. He looked up at James, who was also applauding, tears streaming down the captain's cheeks without shame. Sarah stood frozen, her hand over her mouth, watching her son receive a standing ovation in a palace ballroom. It was a moment she would remember for the rest of her life. Oliver felt his own tears coming, but he remembered what James had told him about being strong. He straightened his posture as much as he could, raised one hand from his walker to wave at the crowd, and smiled his brightest smile. The applause grew even louder. Some people were openly crying now, moved by the sight of this brave child who had overcome so much. Oliver took another step, then another, walking toward the center of the room as the ovation continued. James walked beside him, matching Oliver's slow pace, serving as both guide and protector. Sarah followed a few steps behind, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. They made their way to their assigned table, which was near the front of the room, a place of honor. Several high-ranking military officers stood as they approached, offering Oliver respectful nods and salutes. One elderly general with a chest full of medals shook Oliver's hand firmly and said, "Well done, young man." Well done indeed. As they took their seats, the applause finally died down and conversations resumed. Oliver felt exhausted already, and the evening had barely begun. Walking that distance had taken significant effort, and his legs were aching, but he refused to let it show. He sat up straight, accepted a glass of juice from a passing waiter, and looked around the room with wonder. He was really here. He had really done it. Throughout dinner, various guests stopped by their table to introduce themselves and offer congratulations. A duchess told Oliver she had heard about his journey and found it inspiring. A decorated war hero said Oliver had more courage than soldiers twice his age. A famous athlete mentioned that Oliver's determination reminded him of his own struggles with injury. Each conversation made Oliver feel more confident, more valued, more like he truly belonged in this extraordinary place. The meal itself was unlike anything Oliver had ever experienced. Multiple courses arrived one after another, each more elaborate than the last. There was soup with exotic ingredients, fish prepared in ways he didn't know were possible, meat so tender it fell apart at the touch of a fork, and vegetables arranged like works of art. Oliver tried everything, his eyes widening at new flavors and textures. Sarah watched him with amusement, remembering the simple meals they typically shared at home. This was a different world entirely. After dinner, a military band performed and several speakers took the stage to talk about the evening's charitable purpose. The gala was raising money for wounded veterans and their families, supporting those who had sacrificed for their country. Oliver listened intently, understanding for the first time that he wasn't the only one who had faced challenges. There were soldiers who had lost limbs, suffered injuries, or struggled with invisible wounds. In a way, they were all fighting similar battles. Then something unexpected happened. James stood up and walked to the stage. He hadn't mentioned he would be speaking, and Sarah looked at him with surprise. The room quieted as the captain adjusted the microphone. His voice, usually so firm and commanding, wavered slightly with emotion. "Your Highnesses, distinguished guests, fellow service members, I want to tell you about a boy who changed my life." Oliver's heart began to race. James was talking about him. The captain told the story of their meeting at the palace gates, of a child in a wheelchair who looked at the guards with such admiration and hope. He spoke about the decision to help, about Dr. Chen's incredible work, about the months of painful therapy and unwavering determination. He described Oliver's falls and his courage in getting back up. His voice broke when he talked about the first step Oliver had taken, that tiny movement that had seemed like a miracle. "Tonight," James continued, "you saw Oliver walk into this ballroom. Many of you applauded, moved by his courage, but I want you to understand what that walk truly represents. It represents 8 months of work that would break most adults. It represents a mother who never stopped believing in her son. It represents medical professionals who saw possibility where others saw limitations. And most of all, it represents a child who refused to accept the word impossible." The room was completely silent now. Every eye was on James, and many were filled with tears. "Oliver taught me that being a soldier isn't about wearing a uniform or carrying a weapon. It's about facing your battles with courage no matter how impossible they seem. This 8-year-old boy is more of a soldier than many I've served with, and I'm honored to call him my friend." James gestured toward Oliver. "Would you please stand, Oliver?" Oliver's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He gripped the edge of the table, using his arms to push himself up. His legs shook as they took his weight, but they held. He stood there, swaying slightly but standing nonetheless, and the entire ballroom erupted in applause once more. This time it was even louder, even more emotional. People weren't just clapping. They were cheering, whistling. Some were sobbing openly. Oliver looked across the room at James, who was saluting him with perfect military precision. Through his own tears, Oliver raised his hand and returned the salute. It was shaky and imperfect, but it was real. The crowd's response was deafening. Sarah stood beside her son, holding his arm gently for support, her face wet with tears of pure joy. This moment, this incredible moment, was worth every struggle they had endured. As Oliver slowly sat back down, his legs trembling from the effort, he felt something he had never experienced before. It wasn't just pride or accomplishment. It was belonging. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel different or limited. He felt seen, valued, and celebrated for exactly who he was. The wheelchair that had defined him for so long was nowhere in sight tonight. He was just Oliver, a boy who had worked hard and achieved something remarkable. James returned to the table, and when he sat down beside Oliver, the boy threw his arms around the captain's neck. "Thank you," Oliver whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for believing in me." James hugged him back tightly, not caring who saw this breach of his usual formal composure. "You did all the work, soldier. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it." The rest of the evening passed in a beautiful fleur. Oliver met members of the royal family who congratulated him warmly. A princess shook his hand and told him his story had touched her heart. A young prince, not much older than Oliver himself, sat and talked with him about what it meant to be brave. Oliver felt like he was living in a dream, surrounded by kindness and admiration from people he had only ever seen in photographs or on television. As the gala drew to a close and guests began to leave, Oliver felt the exhaustion finally catching up with him. His legs ached terribly, and he knew he would be sore for days. But it was the best kind of pain, the pain that came from accomplishment and victory. When James brought the wheelchair to take him back to the car, Oliver didn't feel defeated by needing it. He had proven what he needed to prove. He had walked into that ballroom on his own 2 feet, and nothing could take that away from him. During the ride home, Oliver fell asleep against his mother's shoulder, completely spent but deeply content. Sarah stroked his hair gently, thinking about how far they had come from that day at the palace gates. She looked at James, who was driving them home personally, rather than using a palace driver. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You've given us so much more than just medical help. You've given Oliver hope, purpose, and confidence. You've changed our entire lives." James glanced at them in the rearview mirror, smiling. "Oliver changed my life too. I've been going through the motions for years, following routines, maintaining protocols. Meeting him reminded me why I became a guard in the first place. It's not about the ceremony or the uniform. It's about serving others, protecting what matters, and standing up for those who need support. That little boy taught me more about courage and determination than a decade of military service ever did." When they arrived at Sarah's modest home, James carried a sleeping Oliver inside and placed him gently on his bed. Sarah removed his shoes and covered him with a blanket, kissing his forehead softly. James stood in the doorway watching the peaceful scene. "He's going to do great things," he said quietly. "This is just the beginning for him." Sarah nodded, knowing it was true. Oliver had proven he could overcome anything. The future that had once seemed so limited now felt boundless with possibility. Before James left, he turned to Sarah one more time. "I want you to know I'm not going anywhere. I'll keep supporting Oliver, visiting when I can, helping however he needs. He's part of my life now, part of all the guards' lives. We're family." Sarah hugged him, unable to find words big enough to express her gratitude. James simply patted her shoulder and left quietly, driving back through the dark London streets toward the palace. That night, Oliver dreamed of walking. But in his dream, he wasn't using a walker or braces. He was running freely across a vast field, his legs strong and sure beneath him. Captain Mitchell was running beside him, both of them laughing with pure joy. When Oliver woke the next morning, still exhausted but happy, He held on to that dream. Maybe one day it would become reality. And if not, that was okay too. He had already achieved his real dream, proving to himself and the world that nothing was truly impossible if you had courage, support, and the determination to never give up. The weeks following the gala brought unexpected changes to Oliver's life. News of his appearance at the palace had spread through social media and local newspapers. A journalist who had attended the event wrote a touching article about the boy who walked despite impossible odds, and it was picked up by national publications. Suddenly, Oliver's story was everywhere. Sarah received calls from television programs wanting interviews, charities asking him to speak at events, and schools requesting him to visit and inspire other children. At first, Sarah was protective and hesitant. She didn't want Oliver to become overwhelmed or exploited, but James helped her navigate these opportunities, advising which invitations were genuine and which were simply looking for a story to sell. Together, they selected a few meaningful engagements where Oliver could share his experience and hopefully encourage others facing their own challenges. Oliver's first speaking engagement was at a children's hospital, addressing young patients who were dealing with various disabilities and illnesses. Sarah was nervous about how her 8-year-old son would handle speaking to a room full of children, but Oliver surprised her. Standing at a small podium with his walker beside him, he spoke from his heart in simple, honest words that resonated with everyone present. "I used to think that being strong meant having big muscles and running fast," Oliver told the children, some in wheelchairs, others with casts or medical equipment. "But I learned that real strength is in here." He pointed to his heart. "It's about trying even when something is really hard. It's about getting up when you fall down. And it's about believing in yourself even when other people say you can't do something." The children listened with rapt attention. Many of them saw their own struggles reflected in Oliver's words. He told them about the painful therapy sessions, the times he wanted to quit, and the falls that had scared him. But he also told them about the first step, the gala, and the incredible feeling of achieving something everyone said was impossible. "You're all stronger than you think," he concluded. "Don't ever let anyone tell you what you can't do." When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Several children wheeled or walked over to him afterward, wanting to shake his hand or hug him. One little girl in a wheelchair, probably about 6 years old, looked up at Oliver with wide eyes and asked, "Do you think I could walk someday too?" Oliver knelt down carefully, balancing himself. "I don't know," he answered honestly, "but I think if you work really hard and don't give up, you might surprise everyone." "I know I did." Dr. Chen was in the audience that day, and she watched Oliver with professional satisfaction and personal pride. She had treated hundreds of patients over her career, but few had shown Oliver's combination of determination and resilience. After the talk, she approached Sarah and suggested they write down Oliver's therapy regimen and results. "His case could help other children," she explained. "Not every child will have the same outcome, but Oliver's techniques and progress could provide valuable insights for other medical professionals." James continued to be a constant presence in Oliver's life. He visited at least twice a week, sometimes in uniform on his way to or from duty, other times in casual clothes during his off days. He had become like an uncle or older brother to Oliver, someone the boy could talk to about anything. They would discuss everything from military history to school problems, from Oliver's latest therapy achievements to James's experiences as a guard. One afternoon, James brought something special to their visit. He arrived at Sarah's home carrying a large box wrapped in plain brown paper. Oliver's eyes lit up with curiosity. "What's that, Captain?" James set the box down carefully and smiled. "Open it and see." Oliver tore into the wrapping eagerly, then gasped when he saw what was inside. It was a complete Royal Guard uniform, made exactly to Oliver's size, with every detail perfect from the red tunic to the bearskin hat. "You're an honorary guard, Oliver," James said. "That means you deserve a proper uniform. This is yours to keep." Oliver was speechless. He ran his hands over the fabric reverently, feeling the texture of the wool, examining the brass buttons that gleamed in the light. With his mother's help, he put it on immediately. The uniform fit perfectly, and when he looked at himself in the mirror, he saw the soldier he had always dreamed of becoming. Sarah took dozens of photos that day. Oliver stood as straight as he could, his walker beside him saluting in his miniature uniform. James stood next to him in his own uniform, returning the salute with proper military precision. They looked like brothers in arms, united by more than just matching clothes. They were connected by respect, admiration, and a bond that had formed through shared challenges and triumphs. School had become easier for Oliver, too. Before his transformation, he had been bullied occasionally, teased by thoughtless children who didn't understand his condition. But now, returning to school after the gala and the news coverage, he was treated differently. His classmates looked at him with new eyes, seeing not a boy in a wheelchair but a hero who had accomplished something extraordinary. Teachers used his story as an example of perseverance and determination. Oliver made new friends, children who genuinely wanted to know him rather than those who pitied him or ignored him. He joined the school's chess club, discovering he had a talent for strategy. His teacher suggested he might even represent the school in competitions. Oliver's confidence grew in every area of his life, not just physical but academic and social as well. The boy who had once felt invisible was now thriving, but success brought new challenges too. Oliver's body was still fragile in many ways. There were days when his legs simply wouldn't cooperate, when the pain was too much, when he needed his wheelchair again. Some people seemed disappointed when they saw him using the wheelchair after watching him walk at the gala. They had expected a miracle cure, a complete transformation, but Oliver's reality was more complex than that. One particularly difficult day came about 6 months after the gala. Oliver was at school when his right leg suddenly cramped severely during class. The pain was intense and he cried out, drawing everyone's attention. The teacher called Sarah immediately and she had to leave work to pick him up. At the hospital, doctors explained that Oliver had pushed himself too hard. His muscles were developing, but they still had limits. He needed to rest, to allow his body time to recover and strengthen gradually. Lying in the hospital bed, Oliver felt frustrated and angry. He had worked so hard, achieved so much, and now his body was betraying him. When James came to visit that evening, he found Oliver turned toward the wall, refusing to talk. James pulled up a chair and sat quietly for several minutes before speaking. "You know what the hardest part of being a guard is?" he finally asked. Oliver didn't respond, but James continued anyway. "It's not the long hours of standing. It's not the weight of the uniform or the discipline required. It's accepting that some days, despite all your training and effort, your body just won't perform the way you want it to. I've collapsed from heat exhaustion. I've pulled muscles during ceremonies. I've had days where I simply couldn't meet my own standards." Oliver turned slightly, listening now. James went on. "The real test of a soldier isn't never falling or never struggling. It's how you handle those moments. Do you give up, or do you rest, recover, and come back stronger?" He placed a hand on Oliver's shoulder. "You're not failing, Oliver. You're learning. Your body is still adapting, still growing. These setbacks don't erase everything you've accomplished. They're just part of the journey." Those words helped Oliver find perspective. He spent 3 days resting in the hospital, then another week taking it easy at home. Dr. Chen adjusted his therapy schedule, building in more rest periods and focusing on sustainability, rather than pushing for dramatic progress. Oliver learned to listen to his body, to recognize when he needed the wheelchair and when he could walk. It wasn't defeat to use the chair, it was wisdom. As Oliver approached his 9th birthday, he had been in therapy for over a year. His progress had plateaued somewhat, which Dr. Chen said was normal and expected. He could walk short distances with his braces and walker, stand for brief periods, and had much better overall strength and mobility than when he started. He would never walk completely normally, would always need assistance devices, but he had defied every initial prognosis. That in itself was remarkable. For his birthday, James organized something special. He arranged for Oliver and several other children from the hospital to visit the palace for a private tour and a meeting with some of the guards. It wasn't a public event, just a small group of kids who needed inspiration and hope. Oliver, wearing his miniature uniform, led the group through the palace grounds, telling them about his own journey and introducing them to the guards he had come to know as friends. 2 years had passed since that fateful day when Captain James Mitchell first approached a boy in a wheelchair at the palace gates. Oliver was now 10 years old, and his life had transformed in ways that went far beyond his physical improvements. He had become a symbol of hope for children and adults facing seemingly insurmountable challenges. His story had inspired therapy programs across the country, and Dr. Chen's clinic had received funding to help other children receive the same intensive treatment that had helped Oliver. The boy himself had matured considerably. He still had the enthusiasm and joy of childhood, but there was also a wisdom in his eyes that came from experiencing real hardship and overcoming it. He understood pain, frustration, and disappointment in ways most 10-year-olds never would. But he also understood perseverance, hope, and the incredible power of human determination. These lessons shaped him into someone special, someone who touched lives simply by being himself. Sarah had also changed. The constant worry and stress that had defined her life for years had eased. She still worked hard to provide for Oliver, but the financial burden of his medical care had been lifted thanks to the continued support from the Military Veterans Fund. She had even started taking online courses to become a certified physical therapy assistant. Inspired by the work she had witnessed with her son, she wanted to help other families navigate the challenges she had faced. James had been promoted to major, a recognition not just of his military service but also of his humanitarian work with Oliver and other children. The palace had created an official program connecting guards with children facing disabilities. Using Oliver's story as the foundation, James now spent part of his duty time coordinating these efforts, matching guards with young people who needed mentors and support. It had become his passion, his true calling beyond the ceremonial duties he had performed for so many years. Oliver's therapy continued, though at a less intense pace. He visited Dr. Chen's clinic twice a week now instead of 3 times, focusing on maintaining his strength and mobility, rather than pushing for dramatic new gains. His body had reached a plateau which everyone agreed was fine. He could walk with braces and a walker for reasonable distances, stand for extended periods with support, and had enough strength to participate in most normal activities with some accommodation. School had become one of Oliver's favorite places. He excelled academically, particularly in history and writing. His English teacher had encouraged him to write about his experiences, and Oliver had begun keeping a journal. At first it was just for himself, a way to process his feelings and document his journey. But his teacher saw potential in his writing and submitted one of his essays to a youth writing competition. Oliver won first place, and his essay was published in a magazine read by thousands of people. The essay was titled "The View from the Wheelchair," and it offered a perspective that moved readers to tears. Oliver wrote about seeing the world from a lower vantage point, about being overlooked or pitied, about the frustration of wanting to do things his body wouldn't allow. But he also wrote about the incredible people he had met because of his challenges, about the strength he had discovered within himself, and about learning that walking wasn't just a physical act, but a metaphor for moving forward in life despite obstacles. One paragraph in particular resonated deeply with readers. People used to ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up. I would tell them I wanted to be a soldier, and they would smile sadly like I had said something impossible. But now I know I already am a soldier. Every day I fight battles that others can't see. Every day I stand up, even when standing up means just getting out of bed and facing another day of challenges. Being a soldier isn't about the uniform or the gun. It's about courage, determination, and never surrendering no matter how hard things get. The publication of his essay brought new attention to Oliver's story. He received letters from people around the world who had read his words and felt inspired. Parents of disabled children wrote to thank him for giving them hope. Adults facing their own health challenges explained how his perspective had changed theirs. Veterans dealing with injuries told him he embodied the spirit of a true warrior. Each letter touched Oliver deeply, reminding him that his struggle had meaning beyond his own life. James had framed Oliver's published essay and hung it in the guards' quarters at the palace. All the guards had read it, and many kept copies in their lockers as a reminder of what they were really serving. Not just tradition and ceremony, but the people who looked to them for inspiration and protection. Oliver had become an unofficial mascot of the regiment, a symbol of the values they all aspired to embody. On the 2nd anniversary of their first meeting, James organized a special ceremony at the palace. It was a private event, attended only by Oliver, Sarah, Dr. Chen, the therapy team, and a select group of guards who had been involved in Oliver's journey. James had worked with his superiors to create something unique, an official commendation recognizing Oliver's courage and determination. It wasn't a military honor in the traditional sense. but it was a formal acknowledgement from the palace guard of Oliver's impact and inspiration. The ceremony took place in a small courtyard within the palace grounds, away from tourist areas. Oliver stood at attention in his miniature uniform, his walker beside him but not being used for this moment. He had practiced standing unsupported for longer periods, and he was determined to receive this honor on his own 2 feet. James stood before him in full dress uniform, holding a framed certificate and a special medallion that had been designed specifically for Oliver. "Oliver Thompson," James began, his voice formal but warm. "2 years ago you taught me and everyone in this regiment what true courage looks like. You faced challenges that would break most adults, and you did so with grace, determination, and an unwavering spirit. You have inspired not just children but soldiers, not just your family but an entire community. It is my honor to present you with the Palace Guard Distinguished Courage Commendation, the first of its kind ever awarded." James pinned the medallion to Oliver's uniform and handed him the certificate. Oliver's legs were shaking from the effort of standing, but he refused to sit or use his walker. He accepted the commendation with trembling hands, his eyes bright with tears. "Thank you, Major Mitchell," he said, his voice steady despite his emotion. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Thank you for showing me that impossible is just another word for something that hasn't been done yet." The small gathering erupted in applause. Sarah was crying openly, as was Dr. Chen. Even some of the hardened guards had moisture in their eyes. Oliver had touched them all in profound ways, changing not just his own life but theirs as well. After the ceremony, there was a small reception with cake and refreshments. Oliver finally allowed himself to sit, exhausted but radiantly happy, as people congratulated him and shared stories about how he had impacted their lives. Dr. Chen approached Oliver during the reception and handed him another surprise: a photo album. She had been documenting his journey from the very first day, taking pictures during therapy sessions, capturing moments of struggle and triumph. The album started with images of Oliver in his wheelchair, his legs thin and weak, his face uncertain. Page by page it showed his transformation: the first time he stood between the parallel bars, the day he took his first step, his practice sessions for the gala, his speech at the children's hospital, and dozens of other moments. The final page showed a recent photo of Oliver standing tall in his guard uniform, looking every bit the soldier he had always dreamed of becoming. Oliver flipped through the pages slowly, remembering each moment. Some memories were painful, others joyful, but all of them were important. They told the story of his journey, a testament to what human spirit could achieve with support, determination, and courage. He looked up at Dr. Chen with gratitude. "Thank you for never giving up on me," he said simply. She smiled and replied, "You never gave up on yourself. I just provided the tools. You did all the real work." As the reception wound down and guests began to leave, James pulled Oliver aside for a private conversation. They sat together on a stone bench in the courtyard, the afternoon sun warming their faces. "I want to tell you something important," James began. "When I first saw you at the palace gates, I was going through a difficult time. My marriage was falling apart. I was questioning my career, and I felt like my life had lost meaning. Helping you gave me purpose again. You saved me just as much as I helped you." Oliver looked at James with surprise. He had never imagined that the strong, confident captain had his own struggles. "Really?" James nodded. "Really. Sometimes the people we help end up helping us in return. That's the beautiful mystery of kindness and connection. You reminded me why I wear this uniform, why service matters, and what it means to truly make a difference. I'll be forever grateful for that." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching birds flutter through the courtyard. Then Oliver spoke softly. "Major Mitchell, I've been thinking about something. I want to start a program to help other kids like me. Kids who feel like they can't do things because of their disabilities. I want to show them that they're stronger than they think. Would you help me?" James smiled broadly. "Oliver, I thought you'd never ask. I've actually been working on exactly that idea with the palace administration. We want to create a mentorship program pairing guards with children facing challenges. We're calling it Oliver's Warriors, and yes, we'd be honored if you'd be part of leading it." Oliver's face lit up with excitement. The idea that his name would be attached to something that helped other children filled him with purpose. He had gone from being helped to becoming someone who could help others. It was the ultimate achievement, the true measure of how far he had come. When can we start? He asked eagerly. James laughed. How about next month? We'll start small. Just a few children at first and grow from there. You'll meet with them, share your story, encourage them, and guards will work with them as mentors just like I did with you. What do you think? I think it's perfect, Oliver replied, already imagining the faces of children who would benefit from the program. He thought about that little girl at the hospital who had asked if she could walk someday. Maybe through Oliver's warriors she would get her chance. Maybe dozens of children would get their chance. The thought filled him with joy and determination. His journey hadn't just been about walking again. It had been about finding his purpose, his way to make the world a little better. 5 years had passed since Captain James Mitchell first knelt beside a boy in a wheelchair at the palace gates. Oliver was now 13 years old, a teenager navigating the complex world of adolescence with the same determination he had shown in his physical recovery. The boy who had once dreamed of simply standing had grown into a young man who inspired thousands through his words. His actions and his unwavering spirit, Oliver's Warriors had become a thriving program, helping over 100 children in its first 5 years. The initiative had expanded beyond London, with similar programs being established in other cities across the country. Each program paired military personnel with children facing physical challenges, providing mentorship, access to medical care, and most importantly, hope. Oliver remained actively involved, visiting children regularly, speaking at events and serving as a living testament to what was possible. His own physical condition had stabilized. He would always need his leg braces and walker for extended distances, and he still used his wheelchair on difficult days or when he needed to conserve energy. But he had learned to embrace this reality rather than fight against it. His worth wasn't measured by how far he could walk, but by who he was as a person. This acceptance had given him a peace and confidence that radiated in everything he did. School life had its challenges. Being a teenager was complicated enough without the added layer of physical disability. There were still moments of frustration, times when he wanted to play sports like other kids or run without thinking about it. He dealt with occasional teasing, though it was rare now. Most students knew his story and treated him with respect, even admiration. He had good friends who valued him for his personality, his humor, and his intelligence rather than focusing on his limitations. Oliver had developed a particular talent for public speaking. What had started as nervous presentations to small groups had evolved into confident addresses to large audiences. He spoke at schools, hospitals, charity events, and even a national conference on disability rights. His message was always the same. Disability wasn't the end of dreams, just a different path to achieving them. He encouraged young people to see their challenges as opportunities for growth, rather than insurmountable barriers. James, now Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, had become like family. He attended Oliver's school plays, celebrated birthdays with them, and remained a constant source of guidance and support. His own life had improved dramatically since meeting Oliver. He had found new purpose in his work, reconnected with his children from his previous marriage, and even started a new relationship with a teacher he met at one of Oliver's speaking engagements. He often said that Oliver had saved his life in ways the boy would never fully understand. Sarah had completed her certification and now worked as a physical therapy assistant at Dr. Chen's clinic. She worked directly with children and their families, using her own experience to guide them through the emotional and practical challenges of intensive therapy. Parents would often request to work with her specifically, knowing she understood their fears, frustrations, and hopes from personal experience. She had turned her own struggle into a calling, helping dozens of families navigate similar journeys. Dr. Chen had published several papers on Oliver's case and the therapeutic approaches that had proven successful. His treatment had contributed to medical understanding of muscle development in children with similar conditions. She had received grants to study and refine these techniques, potentially helping thousands of children in the future. Oliver had become an important case study, his progress documented and analyzed to benefit others. He was proud to contribute to medical science this way. On a crisp autumn morning, Oliver stood before his bathroom mirror, preparing for a day that would mark another milestone in his remarkable journey. He was scheduled to speak at the National Children's Hospital Annual Conference, addressing pediatric specialists from around the world. At 13, He would be sharing his perspective on patient experience, recovery, and the psychological aspects of physical rehabilitation. It was a significant responsibility, but he felt ready. He carefully put on a suit that Sarah had bought for the occasion, struggling slightly with the tie before getting it right. He strapped on his leg braces with practiced efficiency, a routine he could now do in his sleep. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw someone he was proud of, not because he had overcome disability, but because he had learned to live fully and purposefully despite it. There was a difference, and understanding that difference had been crucial to his happiness. James arrived to drive them to the conference, dressed in civilian clothes, since this was his day off. During the drive, he and Oliver talked about the presentation. "Nervous?" James asked. Oliver considered the question honestly. "A little, but mostly excited. I get to talk to doctors who work with kids like me. Maybe something I say will help them understand their patients better." The conference center was massive, filled with medical professionals from dozens of countries. Oliver felt small among all these important people, but he reminded himself that he had something valuable to offer: his lived experience. The doctors knew the medical side, but he knew what it felt like from the patient's perspective. That knowledge was just as important. When it was time for his presentation, Oliver walked onto the stage with his walker, taking each step carefully but confidently. The audience of several hundred doctors and medical professionals watched respectfully. He reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and began to speak. His voice was steady, his words clear and thoughtful. "My name is Oliver Thompson, and I'm 13 years old. When I was 8, doctors told my mother I would never walk. They were wrong, but not because they were bad doctors. They were wrong because they only looked at my body. They didn't see my heart, my determination, or the amazing people who would come into my life to help me achieve the impossible." He spoke for 30 minutes, sharing his journey in vivid detail. He talked about the pain of therapy, the frustration of setbacks, and the joy of progress. But he also spoke about things doctors might not consider: the emotional impact of being different, the importance of treating children with respect rather than pity, and the power of hope in the healing process. He explained how James's belief in him had been just as important as the physical therapy itself. "When you work with children like me," Oliver concluded, "please remember that we're not just bodies to be fixed. We're whole people with dreams, fears, and feelings. Every exercise you prescribe, every treatment you recommend affects not just our muscles but our hearts and minds. The best doctors and therapists are the ones who see us as partners in recovery, not just patients to be treated. Dr. Chen and my mother and Major Mitchell taught me that recovery isn't something done to you. It's something you do with support from people who believe in you." The standing ovation lasted several minutes. Doctors approached him afterward with questions, comments, and thanks. Several said his presentation had changed how they would approach their work. One elderly physician with tears in his eyes told Oliver that in 40 years of practice, he had never heard a patient articulate the experience so clearly. Oliver felt humbled and honored. His struggle had meaning beyond himself. It was contributing to better care for children everywhere. That evening, James took Oliver and Sarah to dinner at a nice restaurant to celebrate. They sat at a quiet table, enjoying good food and easy conversation. At one point, Oliver grew thoughtful and quiet. "What's on your mind?" James asked gently. Oliver played with his fork for a moment before responding. "I was just thinking about that day at the palace gates. If you hadn't stopped to talk to me, my whole life would be different. I'd probably still be in my wheelchair full-time, never having tried therapy, never having met Dr. Chen or started Oliver's Warriors. One moment of kindness from you changed everything." James reached across the table and placed his hand on Oliver's. "And one moment of courage from you changed me. You gave me purpose when I had lost mine. You reminded me what really matters in life. We saved each other, Oliver. That's how it works. We're all connected, and sometimes one small act of kindness creates ripples that spread farther than we can imagine." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes, listening to these two people who meant everything to her. Her son had grown into an extraordinary young man, and James had become the father figure Oliver had never had. They were a family, bonded not by blood but by shared struggle, mutual respect, and genuine love. She felt overwhelmed with gratitude for how life had unfolded. As they finished dinner and prepared to leave, Oliver stood from his chair without his walker, balancing carefully. He had been practicing this, wanting to surprise them. He took 3 slow steps toward James and Sarah, his face concentrated but determined. They watched with held breath, ready to catch him if he stumbled. But he made it, standing between them with pride glowing on his face. 3 steps without support, he announced. That's a new record. James and Sarah both hugged him, careful not to knock him off balance. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it represented so much more. It represented 5 years of hard work, countless therapy sessions, and an unbreakable spirit. It represented the power of hope, determination, and human connection. Walking to the car, Oliver used his walker again, conserving his energy. But he felt lighter somehow, more complete. His journey from that wheelchair at the palace gates had taught him lessons that went far beyond physical movement. He had learned about resilience, kindness, purpose, and the incredible capacity humans have to overcome obstacles when they have support and belief. Looking up at the stars as they drove home, Oliver thought about all the children who would benefit from Oliver's warriors in the years to come. He thought about the doctors who might change their approaches because of his presentation. He thought about the families who would read his story and find hope. His life had become bigger than himself, connected to countless others through threads of inspiration and shared humanity. He couldn't run marathons or play professional sports. He would always need assistance devices and would face challenges others never considered. But he had walked into a palace ballroom. He had inspired thousands of people. He had contributed to medical research and helped create a program that would outlive him. He had found his purpose and lived it every day. In the end, that was better than walking normally could ever be. As they pulled into their driveway, Oliver felt contentment settle over him like a warm blanket. He was exactly where he was meant to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The boy who had once only dreamed of walking had discovered something far more valuable: the ability to lift others up, to be a light in dark moments, and to prove that the human spirit could triumph over any obstacle. James helped Oliver out of the car, and the 3 of them stood together in the quiet evening. The stars twinkled above them, and somewhere in the distance the city lights of London glowed softly. "Thank you," Oliver said simply, looking at both James and his mother. "For everything. For believing in me. For never giving up. For showing me what love and support really mean." Sarah kissed her son's forehead, her eyes glistening. "You did the hard work, sweetheart. We just held your hand along the way." James nodded in agreement. "And we'll keep holding it for as long as you need us. That's what family does." Inside the house, Oliver went to his room and sat on his bed, looking around at the space that had witnessed his entire transformation. Pictures covered the walls. Him with James in their matching uniforms, him receiving his commendation at the palace, him speaking at various events, him with the children from Oliver's warriors. Each image told part of his story, captured moments of growth, struggle, and triumph. His miniature guard uniform hung in the closet, perfectly pressed and ready for his next official appearance. His medals and certificates were displayed on a shelf his mother had installed. Books about military history, physical therapy, and motivational biographies filled his bookcase. Everything in this room reflected who he had become and who he was still becoming. Oliver changed into comfortable clothes and sat at his desk, opening his laptop. He had promised to email a young girl named Emma, who had just started therapy at Dr. Chen's clinic. She was 7 years old with a condition similar to Oliver's, and she was scared and uncertain. Oliver had met her the previous week and promised to stay in touch, to answer her questions and encourage her journey. He typed carefully, choosing words that would resonate with a frightened child while being honest about the challenges ahead. "Dear Emma," he wrote, "I know therapy is hard and sometimes scary. I know there are days when you'll want to give up. But I promise you, every bit of effort is worth it. You're stronger than you think, braver than you believe, and capable of amazing things. I'll be here cheering you on every step of the way. You've got this, warrior. Your friend, Oliver." He sent the email and closed his laptop, feeling the familiar sense of purpose that came from helping others. This was his mission now, his way of paying forward all the kindness and support he had received. Every child he encouraged, every family he inspired, every doctor he educated was another ripple spreading outward from that moment at the palace gates 5 years ago. The next morning was Saturday, which meant Oliver had his weekly video call with the children currently enrolled in Oliver's Warriors. The program had grown to include 12 children across London. each paired with a military mentor. They met as a group once a week online to share their progress, challenges, and victories. Oliver led these sessions, creating a supportive community where no one had to face their struggles alone. As faces appeared on his screen, Oliver smiled at each child. There was Marcus, age 9, who was working on regaining mobility after a car accident. Sophie, age 11, who had cerebral palsy and was learning to walk with assistance. David, age 6, who had been born with clubfoot and had undergone multiple surgeries. Each child had their own story, their own battles, but they were united in their determination and in the support they received from Oliver's warriors. "Good morning, everyone," Oliver greeted them enthusiastically. "Who wants to share their wins from this week?" Hands shot up in the video grid. Marcus went first, excitedly explaining that he had walked 10 steps without his walker, a personal record. The group cheered for him, everyone understanding the significance of that achievement. Sophie shared that she had stood up during her school presentation without assistance, earning applause from her classmates. David showed off a drawing he had made using his feet, demonstrating improved coordination. Oliver listened to each story with genuine interest and celebration. He knew exactly how each small victory felt, the rush of accomplishment that came from achieving something others took for granted. He offered encouragement, practical advice from his own experience, and reminded them all that progress wasn't always linear. "Some weeks you'll move forward, some weeks you'll struggle," he said. "Both are okay. Both are part of the journey. What matters is that you keep showing up, keep trying, keep believing in yourself." After the group call ended, Oliver had a private session with a new child who had just joined the program. Her name was Lily, and she was 8 years old, the same age Oliver had been when he met James. She appeared on the screen looking small and uncertain, her mother sitting beside her for support. Oliver could see himself in her eyes, that mixture of hope and fear, wanting to believe but afraid of disappointment. "Hi, Lily," Oliver said warmly. "I'm really glad you're joining Oliver's Warriors. Can you tell me a little about yourself?" Lily spoke quietly, explaining that she had never walked and doctors said she probably never would. Her voice trembled as she described the therapy she had tried before, treatments that hadn't worked and had left her feeling defeated. Oliver listened patiently, nodding with understanding. When she finished, Oliver leaned closer to the camera. "Lily, I want to tell you something important. 5 years ago, I was sitting in a wheelchair at the palace gates, and I felt exactly like you do right now. I had tried therapy before. Doctors had told me I'd never walk. I was scared and tired and ready to give up on that dream." Lily's eyes widened, hanging on every word. "But then something amazing happened," Oliver continued. "A royal guard named James Mitchell saw me and decided to help. Not because he pitied me, but because he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. He saw a warrior. And you know what? I am a warrior. And so are you." He paused, letting that sink in. "Lily, I can't promise you'll walk. Every person is different, and I'm not a doctor. But I can promise you this. If you try, if you work hard and don't give up, you'll discover strengths you never knew you had. You'll become someone amazing whether you walk or not. Because being a warrior isn't about your legs. It's about your heart." Tears rolled down Lily's cheeks, but she was smiling now. Her mother squeezed her hand, also crying. "Will you help me?" Lily asked in a small voice. Oliver smiled broadly. "Absolutely. That's what warriors do. We help each other. You're not alone anymore, Lily. You've got me, you've got your mentor from the program, you've got your family, and you've got a whole community of kids just like you. Together, we're going to show the world what we're made of." After the call, Oliver sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of responsibility and the joy of purpose. He was 13 years old, but he had already lived a lifetime of experiences that had shaped him into someone who could make a real difference. His journey from wheelchair to walker hadn't just been about physical transformation. It had been about discovering his true calling, to be a beacon of hope for others walking similar paths. That afternoon, James stopped by with news that made Oliver's heart soar. The palace had decided to establish an annual award in Oliver's name, the Oliver Thompson Courage Award, to be given each year to a child who demonstrated extraordinary determination in overcoming physical challenges. The first award would be presented at a special ceremony next month, and Oliver would have the honor of selecting the recipient from nominations submitted by doctors and therapists across the country. "You've inspired something bigger than yourself," James explained, his voice thick with pride. Your story, your work with Oliver's Warriors, your speeches and advocacy, it's all created a movement. Children everywhere know your name and draw strength from your example. This award ensures that your legacy will continue long into the future, inspiring generations of children to come. Oliver felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what James was saying. He had never sought fame or recognition. He had simply wanted to walk, and then later to help others who faced similar struggles. But somehow, his personal journey had become something universal, a story that resonated with people because it spoke to fundamental human truths about resilience, hope, and the power of kindness. That evening, the entire family gathered for dinner, including James, who had become an honorary member. They sat around the small kitchen table that had witnessed so many conversations over the years, sharing a simple meal and easy laughter. Oliver looked around at the faces of the people who meant everything to him and felt a profound sense of gratitude. His life hadn't turned out the way he once imagined, but it had turned out better. He had found his purpose, his family, and his place in the world. As they finished eating, Oliver stood up from his chair without his walker, balancing carefully. Everyone watched quietly, understanding this was something important. He raised his glass of juice in a toast, his legs trembling slightly but holding steady. To family, he said, his young voice filled with emotion. To second chances. To believing in the impossible. And to Captain James Mitchell, who stopped at the palace gates 5 years ago and changed everything. James raised his own glass, tears streaming openly down his face now. To Oliver, he replied, who taught an old soldier what true courage really looks like, who saved me as much as I helped him, who reminds us all that the greatest strength comes from the heart. They all clinked glasses, and in that simple moment, Oliver felt complete. His legs might never be perfect, but his life was full of love, purpose, and meaning. Later that night, as Oliver prepared for bed, he stood at his window looking out at the London skyline. Somewhere out there were children like Lily, scared and uncertain, wondering if they would ever overcome their challenges. Somewhere out there were parents lying awake at night, worried about their children's futures. Somewhere out there were people who had lost hope and needed someone to show them it still existed. Oliver touched the medal James had given him, now hanging on his bedroom wall. He thought about the long journey from that wheelchair at the palace gates to this moment, standing at his window, a young man with purpose and power to change lives. The road had been harder than he ever imagined, filled with pain and setbacks and moments of despair, but it had also been beautiful, filled with kindness and triumphs and the discovery of his truest self. He didn't know what the future held. Maybe he would walk more independently as he got older, or maybe he would always need his walker and braces. Maybe he would face new challenges, or maybe life would become easier. But whatever came, he knew he would face it with the same courage and determination that had brought him this far. He was Oliver Thompson, warrior, inspiration, and living proof that impossible was just another word for something that hadn't been done yet. As he finally settled into bed, Oliver whispered a quiet thank you to the universe, to all the people who had believed in him, and to that royal guard who had seen potential in a boy in a wheelchair and decided to do something about it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to help others. But tonight, Oliver Thompson slept peacefully, knowing he had already achieved something truly remarkable. He had walked, yes, but more importantly, he had shown countless others that they could walk too, whether with their legs or with their hearts. And that made all the difference.